Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this our second webinar on the structured problem solving for your final reports. There isn't anybody actually who has joined online, so I'm just wondering if somehow it's a public holiday or if there was a clash with your schedules. But anyway, I will carry on with delivering the session, and you will all have access to the recording. So last time that we met, we started the work on phase one, which is essentially defining the project that we want to deliver, essentially the project design. So today, what we're going to do is we're going to continue and complete the part around defining the project. Hi, Mary, welcome. I started the webinar already since it's past time. Oh, okay, there are more people coming in.
Hi, good afternoon. Sorry for being late.
You could just unmute yourself.
Hi, Nicholas.
Hello. Okay, I had started the webinar since there was nobody present, but I guess I will restart now since three of you joined. So as I was saying, last time that we met, we started the work on phase one, which is part of the project design, and we started to learn how to define the project that we want to deliver, and at the core, define the problem that we want to solve. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to continue and complete this phase one, which is around the initial design of the project. So basically, what we want to deliver. Yeah. So since you're actually present, or some of you are present in the webinar, as a reminder, please do participate in the discussions. Feel free to speak up at any time or raise your hand if you want to say something. And of course, the slides and the recording will be available after the webinar. So what we will do today, I'm going to do a quick recap of what we've covered so far. And then I'm going to provide feedback on the SCQ optional assignments that were submitted. And then we will go on with completing the content of phase one, which is PDT, which stands for Project Definition Template. So let me start then with a recap. So again, I'm always going to start there, which is basically where we want to end up, which is in a place where the stakeholders who depend on us for this project basically believe or feel, right, that we worked on the right problem. This is very much about actually what we're doing right now, making sure that we're defining the right problem, the right project. That they understand our solution, that's very much about communication. We'll cover that much later. That they agree with it. This is about us having done the right kind of analysis, research and analysis. So that's kind of basically in between phases 1 and 6 or 7, and that they know how to implement it. So as a reminder, this methodology is a linear methodology, but and we want to apply it step by step. But it's also one where it can make sense to iterate. So in other words, to kind of go back to an earlier step if there's any kind of insight that suggests that we should go back to an earlier step. Yeah, so you should not hesitate to do that. This often happens. This is part of the problem-solving process where we get some insight that makes us reconsider the road or part of the road that we've taken on, and therefore we decide to kind of go back in order to engage on a different road. Also crucial, and this is why we're investing so many webinars upfront on this topic, is the idea that like we really want to get the overall design of the project. We want to get it right. So in other words, we really want to invest in making sure that we really know what we want to deliver in very specific terms, and that we have a clear plan of attack, because this helps to ensure that the execution is a lot more seamless. So not only a lot more efficient, so we avoid doing unnecessary work, but also a lot more effective. So in other words, that it actually delivers the goods. Yeah. So it's remarkable how much of an impact these early phases have on the continuation of the project. And then last point, again, as a reminder, since you're working with and for a sponsor and possibly some other stakeholders, make sure that you involve them every step along the way, yeah, in order to get their input. They're hugely, immensely valuable input. Their input will be crucial in ultimately making sure that you come up with something or deliver something that is right, in quotes, useful, that resonates with them, and so on, right? So you're much more likely to get the final buy-in if they've been involved along the way. Good. So this is just about kind of, let's say, good healthy practices. Now, as far as content, so what we learned last time, right? We learned that a really helpful way to define a problem, to frame a problem, is as a specific question about what to do. So in other words, first as a question, but actually a question about what to do, because ultimately what we want to produce are recommendations, right? So in the help desk case that we have been looking at, the question was, how can help desk restore profits to 220 levels within 2 years? And so we wanted to be specific enough that there is virtually no room for different interpretations of what that question means, right? If it's too vague, the problem is that different people could understand it in different ways, which could lead to all sorts of confusion and ultimately frustration or disappointment down the line, right? It can even have an internal problem, which is that we think that we have a certain meaning in our minds right now, and then 2 months later we forget really what we meant, or we have somehow the meaning in our minds has evolved. So when the question is very specific, like it is here, there's no way to misunderstand it, yeah, or to understand it in a different way. Now, what we also talked about was the value of being able to articulate why this problem matters, why anybody should care. And we want to be able to do that, because if there's no reason to care, why should we waste our time working on this, right? So it's partially about motivating ourselves to work on this project, but also partially about getting the involvement, the input of stakeholders whose time, energy, opinions, maybe information, data, or whatever we are seeking in order to deliver our projects. And so to highlight the importance, the significance of a question, we learned the SCQ method, right? The situation complication method, where basically the situation is let's say some kind of a starting point, and the complication is something. It can be an event or threat or even an opportunity, but something that comes to impact the situation in such a way that the status quo is disrupted, and in such a way that we can't sit still with that disruption. So in other words, that we feel like we need to do something about it. And the question that we're going to work on is basically our attempt at addressing that complication. So in other words, if we answer the question, then the disruption somehow goes away. We might not go back to a status quo ex ante, we might go to a new normal, but things come back in some kind of we get back to some kind of a resolved state. That's the idea, right? So that is what we learned last time. Before I get into the feedback of the optional assignments that were submitted, are there any questions or thoughts about what we have covered so far, either about, let's say, the general best practices of the methodology or the content that we covered so far, or even some, let's say, more background questions around getting a topic, getting sponsors, anything of the sort that any of you would like addressed at this point? No? Okay. Then I will go ahead and provide the feedback. So overall, so I received 3 submissions. It's not a lot. There have been years where I received a lot more. But I was very happy with the submissions I received. I thought they were very good. So again, the objective here is for me to give illustrative feedback. So not just that the author benefits, but actually that everybody benefits, right? Because basically I'm going to be pointing to either some things that don't work well or some things that work well and that are worth thinking about as you develop your own project definition. I've also included in the slides some additional examples from earlier cohorts. I'm not going to comment on those, but at least you have a few more, let's say, reference points for your own project. So here's the way it's going to work. For those of you who are present, I want you to have a chance to benefit from the feedback that I'm going to provide. So I'm going to show the SCQ one at a time. I'm going to and then ask you to read it, take the time to read it, and then please let me know in the chat box when you're done reading it. And at that point, I will provide the feedback. So here is the first one. It's a bit wordy, but well, it's well written. So just let me know in the chat box when you're done reading it. Okay, thank you for letting me know that you're done. So I'm going to start providing some feedback on this. So overall, what do I like about this? I think it's actually very well written, in very clear language. I think very easy to understand. So I think that's very good. And I think the second thing is that the logical flow is very good. So in other words, like we properly have a situation, complication, question, like that whole flow works. The complication really is a complication to the situation, and the questions, let's say, emanate logically from the way that this complication is impacting the situation. So now, some opportunity for improvement. So I think one is right now there are two key questions. And again, I'm a very big disciple of the idea that we want to define our problem as a single question and not more than one question. Because if we have more than one question, it essentially means we're trying to solve more than one problem, and we don't have clarity on what is the overarching problem that we're trying to solve. Yeah. Now, technically, actually, the second question here about partnerships fits under go-to-market strategy, right? So in a go-to-market strategy, one of the things that you need to solve is the question of kind of channels. And this is where partnerships fits in. So, so technically it is. Now, I understand that the author probably wants to emphasize the partnership piece to make sure that it doesn't kind of get lost or buried. But you can actually do this by highlighting it in the question itself, but also by specifying the question of partnerships in the other items that we will cover today that are part of the project definition template. Yeah. So we haven't covered those items yet. This is what we're going to do today. But basically, there are more items about the overall project design that we are going to want to be specifying. And there is a spot where the specific issue of partnerships can be, let's say, recorded or noted in this PDT project definition template. So actually two spots. One of them is in the success criteria, and the other one is in the deliverables. Now, second comment that I would have is that so a go-to-market strategy actually consists of a lot of items, right? So, I mean, normally like a full go-to-market strategy includes things like definition of the target market, the value proposition, the product, the pricing, the channels, the customer acquisition strategy, and so on. There's more. So I would strongly suggest, again, once you get to the rest of the project definition template, to clearly list the specific must-have items, right? Probably you're not going to deliver every aspect of the go-to-market strategy, or for sure there are some aspects that are higher priority than others. So the must-haves, the ones that you really have to have, then I would suggest to specify them in the rest of the in the other parts of the project definition template, just so that it becomes clear to you, but also to whoever else, what is the priority here, and it puts a little bit more. It puts a bit more specificity on what you mean in this context by go-to-market strategy. Now, my last comment on this is actually taking a big step back. The idea of building for this company, right, week one, let's say building both of these geographies in parallel, so Germany and Saudi Arabia, which are not only very far from each other, but very different from each other, and adopting different models. So doing all this at the same time in parallel, I actually think business-wise is not very wise. So if I were advising actually the founders, I would just say, start with one geography, make that work, and wait until some set of conditions are fulfilled before you start working on the second geography. Now, this is just kind of basic good business practice to start focused and learn how to do one thing really well before branching out. So you might want to have another discussion with the founders and see if you want to redefine the problem altogether. again, I think you can work on this. As it currently is, there's nothing wrong with working on this for a final report. But I just think that I don't think that this is really the right thing for the company itself. But the project could potentially be redefined along the lines of, under what conditions, either in Germany or KSA, would it make sense to start developing the other region? So in other words, what degree of maturity, you could say, or what milestones must the first geography achieve before we start actually diverting resources to start building the second geography? That could be a way to redefine the problem that is both wiser from a business perspective, but that could also still be very useful for the sponsors. But okay, so anybody else have any comments or questions on this particular submission? No? Okay. Then let me move on to the next one. And again, I give you time to read it and let me know when you're done reading it. I'll wait for a couple more people to give me the sign that they're done. Okay. Good. So I think, again, I'll provide my feedback on this one. So I think what works in this one is actually very similar to the previous one. So I think that overall it's clear, it's well written. And then the general flow of the logic from situation to complication to question also works rather well. Where I see opportunity. So the first one is the whole complication section right now is actually is written kind of like in negative terms. So in other words, it's kind of like, hey, the current practices have all these limitations, these problems, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And then the question is, how can we use AI? I would actually suggest to rewrite the complication in positive terms. So in other words, instead of talking about all the problems with the current approach, I would reframe it in terms of the opportunity that AI creates. Okay. And I would do this for two reasons. So the first is that there is actually a small logical inconsistency right now between the situation and the complication, right? In the situation, it says that all these practices have been the foundation to maintain a safe and compliant operating environment, right? And then immediately after, in the complication, it kind of says, and all these practices are no good or not good enough. So there's a contradiction there, right? Or an inconsistency. And then the second reason is that actually by reframing that whole complication in more positive terms, i.e. in terms of the AI opportunity, it actually just makes it a lot more inspiring, right? And again, there's plenty of research that shows that like people respond a lot better to something that is sort of inspiring, so opportunity, than to something which doesn't work. Yeah, the idea of a burning platform, if by a burning platform we mean something that is just really bad and that like we need to solve right away, does not tend to generate the same kind of sustained enthusiasm and buy-in as opportunity. So that's one thing. Second, the question is very long, very long. And what we really want ideally is we want kind of a question that is synthetic, a question that is kind of easy to remember, easy for anybody to digest when they hear it or they read it, right? So I think that the reason that this question is so long is because there are so many different like objectives that are written into the question. I would suggest all these individual objectives can actually be specified again in the other parts of the project definition template that we're going to cover today. And here in the question, they could be summarized, right? So for example, the question could be something like, how can Siemens integrate AI to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of its risk management? Done. And later in the project, later, meaning in the other parts of the project definition template, we define more explicitly what does it mean, what do we mean here by efficiency and by effectiveness, right? So that's second comment. Now, there's a third sort of issue with, or second issue with the question, because the question talks about, how can Siemens effectively integrate AI technologies? But it's actually not clear what is meant by effectively integrate. It's really not clear. Does it mean, how could what is the full set of benefits that Siemens should strive to get from AI? Well, I think that's actually already kind of answered in the complication, in the current complication, right? Or is it more a question about organization and processes? So given that AI can deliver all these benefits, how do we need to rethink our workflows, potentially org structures, roles within the organization, et cetera, to make sure that like we can really harness the power of AI? So is it an orgs and process question? Or is it actually an IT question, right? So how do we integrate the AI tools with the existing systems, like the ERP and then other applications that we use and so on and so forth? So, or is it even an ethical and regulatory sort of question? So really the whole the idea, the concept of effectively integrate, it sounds nice and intuitively, yeah, it's we can all sort of connect to it, but actually it's really not clear what the author means here. What is the specific aspect of AI integration that they really want to focus on? So my suggestion would be that whatever the angle of attack, whatever the frame, whether it's orgs and processes or the IT dimension or whatever, I would actually suggest the following. First, make that more explicit in the question. So don't use the word effectively integrate, but actually, because that's too euphemistic, but actually say what you mean. And then I would actually, if we assume now that you have reframed the complication in terms of the AI opportunity, I would take all of that and move it into the situation. So that now the situation basically says, hey, so far we've been doing everything, all risk management manually, and AI provides a great opportunity that can help improve efficiency and effectiveness. That's the situation. And then the complication where you would summarize the hurdles that make this integration non-trivial, right? Because then we have a really good flow, right? A much better flow. Basically, the situation essentially is there's a great opportunity, complication. However, it is not easy to get our hands on it because of org processes or because of IT or whatever. Therefore, the question is, how can we overcome those hurdles? That would be a bit my suggestion about how to tackle this one. Right now, I feel like the knob of the problem is actually buried. It's not clear really what the person wants to solve. Any questions or comments on this one from the audience?
I think, Nicholas, from my side, I think the observation is I think the inherent confirmation that there's a very heavy reliance on manual intervention, right? So that for me, I see is probably the core fundamental issue that brings out versus looking at the AI um for simplification and process optimization, right? So it's not really so clear for me.
Okay, I see what you mean. Okay. Um,
It's more stating the overuse of manual and Excel beyond what the actual core issue is. And
yeah. Okay, I see. It could be read that way, actually. It could be read that way. It's interesting. I mean, it's interesting, right? So here we have two people, you and me, who read it differently. I assumed now I might have a bit of unfair information or unfair access to information that you did not have. Let me just double check that. I'm just going to quickly double check that. I can totally see how you would read it the way that you did. Um, Let me just kind of pull up the actual submission. Yeah, okay. So in the submission, there was a little paragraph before the SCQ, brief project description, and it says the project focuses on exploring and applying AI technologies to improve risk management, blah, blah, blah. So this is the reason that I've assumed that this whole project is about AI. Is because basically the person said so. But you're totally right that without that introductory paragraph, which I was privy to, that one could actually read this not as being about AI per se, but actually being about
I see it about risk management,
yeah,
about optimizing risk management processes for effectiveness within an organization.
exactly with or without AI. Yeah,
With or without AI,
yeah,
doesn't matter. AI is just a vehicle.
yeah. But see yeah, this speaks a lot to it's a great example, right, of how people can understand things differently. Um, any other comments or questions? No. Okay, then I will move on to
Maybe one remark from my side. For me, it sounds a little bit like the answer to this question might be already there. It's like it's so narrowed. The question is so narrowed that you might even just already guess the answer. It's like it's only how, it's not there are no alternatives, and so it's pretty already aligned how it will end up, I guess.
so I'm not so sure because I actually think that the question is not clear.
Yeah, but for me, it sounds like they already have decided to go that way. There is even no question, does it work? So for me, I'm missing maybe the part, if it's feasible, does it work? And then how does it work? I'm not quite sure. It's just a feeling.
So I agree. I think based on what we read, it's kind of you can infer that basically it's the decision is almost made, or let's say at least the assumption is made that we're going to go with AI in order to.
Exactly.
So that assumption is made. But what's not clear is if, let's say, if that decision is made, why are we even making a project out of this? And right, we could just decide to do it.
We could just do it. Yes.
But if we're making a project out of it, is because there is something that is not trivial. There is something that is worthy of a project. So, in other words, there's some kind of a hurdle that we need to conquer.
Yeah, and okay, and maybe that's the question linked for me. You don't have to work in this place out the challenges that might come up with the project. So these are the next steps. You just have to raise the question, and if it's like phrased like that, like how can we effectively do this, then that's enough.
Right. So what I think what's not clear here is what is the hurdle that the author has in their mind, right? What is the
Exactly. Yeah.
exactly. And so this is why I said the hurdles here could be from a whole variety of places, right? It could be like a organ processes type of hurdle. Because the fact is, when you're going to use AI, it's going to have an impact on workflows. It's going to have an impact on the jobs or the roles of, or on the jobs that need to be done and who needs to do them, et cetera, right? So it's going to have all of that, which ultimately could even have an impact on training and stuff like this. So it could be that. Or it could be a whole IT thing, the whole IT dimension of AI, right? So instead of having these AI tools that are completely separate from our existing IT systems, where somehow we get the answer from AI, and then we need to somehow input all of this into our systems, there might be really a question of integrating the AI, making the AI a part of our whole systems. So how do we do that? That could be the question. Again, it's not clear. Or it could even be, I don't think so, it's unlikely, but it could even be like an ethical regulatory question.
But I think the biggest statement there in the middle of the question is safety, right? So that's the key issue is safety. So and automation of safety protocols and risk management.
Yeah, but safety is just one of the things that so safety is one of the things that risk management wants to protect or is designed to protect, right? And AI is the solution that is being considered in order to improve risk management. So safety is actually not at the core of this project. It's a beneficiary of this project, but it's not at the core of the project itself. Okay, let me move on to the final one. Again, let me know when you are done reading it. Okay, good. So again, I think the big picture, I think the overall flow is sufficiently clear. I think also sufficiently logical, all from a big picture perspective. For me, there are two kind of like issues here. One big one and then one smaller one. So the big one is, or actually, let's say three issues. One big one and then two small ones. The big one is in the question, and the question says, "How can we create a scalable blah 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 blah?" The big question is, who is we? Is it a company? Is it the industry as a whole? Is it something else? It's really not clear who is we. And this really matters because it has a direct impact on the degrees of freedom, the kinds of recommendations that make sense, in order to basically understand who is, to even understand the problem and the solution, we need to understand who is the protagonist here. So I think we have the author of this submission here. So maybe the author wants to share with us who is the we in the question. Okay, maybe the author doesn't want to speak. Okay, so I think that's a big one. But to me, again, the two main things that come to my mind is it could be a particular company or it could be the industry as a whole. And if it's either one of those, that's very different if we're talking about a company or industry as a whole. If either way, I would try to make it very explicit. So not only in the question itself, instead of saying we, it should be whoever, but if it's a company, then I would actually introduce that company in the situation. Yeah. If it's the industry, then you really want to you want to be thinking even more explicitly about. So the thing is, industries as a whole are not like they're not these sort of organisms or organizations that make decisions. To the extent that industries move in a deliberate way in a certain direction, as opposed to organically. Yeah? So in other words, make conscious decisions to move in a certain direction as an industry, it's usually through some kind of I don't want to say consortium is not quite the right word, but some kind of a body that is largely advisory, but where maybe people at least make maybe non-binding decisions, right? So the big representatives of the big industries make non-binding decisions, but nevertheless, they're kind of like moral commitments to go into that direction. So if the we here is meant to represent the industry, you might want to be even more specific than simply the industry and kind of say it's, this particular congregation or consortium or whatever of the industry, because then it becomes a question. Part of the question becomes, so what can this consortium do in order to facilitate all the changes that you aspire to see here? So that's the big issue here. So I actually think right now, in its current state, this is not a workable project. It's fixable, but in its current state, this is not really a workable project because this we is too is just not defined. Second thing, so this is smaller, but I think the question, just like the previous question, is very long here. And I think exactly the same technique can be applied. So basically, the detailed objectives that are currently built into the question could be summarized in the question and the specifics moved into the other parts of the project definition template. And finally, in the complication. So there's 3 sentences, which you can see I've colored differently. So actually 2 things about the complication. Just if we're so the first is actually the last sentence of the situation, the however, I would actually move that into the complication because that is kind of like the overarching perspective on the complication. And then I would flip the order of the blue and the green sentences, because the green actually follows from the black and the blue follows from the green. So it would be actually a lot more logical, a much more logical flow if it were ordered in that way. Any questions or comments on this one? Okay. Then that was it for the feedback. So then let's go on with the content. So it's actually today's webinar in terms of new content is probably the easiest of them all. The next two will be quite challenging. So we have learned. So just as a matter of context, the whole purpose here, the whole, let's say, driving logic is that before we kind of like engage in any kind of time-consuming activity, and in this case, it's really this 400-hour project, right, that you're going to work on. It really helps to have a very clear idea of what we want to achieve with this project, yeah, or anything. Like before engaging in anything that is it requires significant time and effort, it really pays to have a very clear idea of what we want to achieve. So we have already learned SCQ, right? And so the question is basically it's going to be the core of our project. That's what we're going to try to solve. And of course, we're going to try to get to an answer. And of course, we don't know the answer. Otherwise, we wouldn't be doing the project. But the whole idea here is that like there are, even though we don't know what the answer is, there are some things about the answer that we can already describe. And if we can specify them already now, it will basically make the road clear. It'll make it clear about where we want to end up. So in particular, there's three dimensions, let's say, of the answer that can be described already upfront. So the first one is the notion of scope, right? So this is kind of like the scope of the solution set. Yeah. So in other words, it's the kinds of solutions that we want to be considering or not considering, or it's the space or perimeter where we should be looking for solutions or not looking for solutions. Yeah. So this is not about what makes a good solution or bad solution. It's the difference more between an acceptable solution and an unacceptable solution, like a solution that qualifies versus a solution that does not qualify, right? So in the case of help desk, for example, it could be the following, that we have to maintain the business model, the existing business model, right? So whatever the team comes up with, it has to be within the existing business model. Yeah. So that's not saying that a solution that maintains the current business model is good. It's just saying that if it doesn't, then it just doesn't qualify. That's not what we want. Yeah. Then it could be that it's okay to consider new services. And then we could also kind of say, here's what we should exclude. For example, wages of technical staff. So in other words, maybe the CEO doesn't want to basically change, in this case, reduce the wages of the technical staff as part of the solution. Okay, so that's scope. And the more you can define the scope, the more specifically you can define the scope, already the less confusion there will be, the less risk of going in the wrong direction. Now, the second thing that can be described about the answer is basically the objectives and success criteria. A good way to think about this is the following. So you're going to be making recommendations. Yeah. And these recommendations, with those recommendations come a certain set of promises, right? The idea is that these recommendations, if implemented, they come with a certain set of promises, explicit or implied. And so these objectives and success criteria are basically going to be the standards by which the decision makers evaluate those recommendations. So the promises that come with those recommendations in order to decide whether or not to go ahead with the recommendations. So I don't know, I'll just say something very simple, but if the question is kind of like, how can I jump higher? And you make a recommendation that helps me to improve the height of my jump by 10 centimeters, I might actually say I'm not interested. I actually want something that will help me jump at least 1 meter more than I can do today, for example. So in the case of help desk, what it could be is the following. So 2028 profits are at least equal to the 2020 levels. That is actually repetitive with what's in the question right now, but that's fine. And here there's no problem with being redundant if it helps with clarity. Then it could be that measures must be long-term sustainable, but that there should also be some quick wins, and that the service quality must remain. Whatever you recommend, it must not make the service quality worse, for example. So these are the success criteria or the objectives that we want the recommendations to help achieve. Okay. And then the third bit that we can describe about the answer is the deliverables. Now, when we use the word deliverables, people often think, oh, it's a presentation, it's a report, or it's a whatever, a PowerPoint document or something like this. But that's actually not a really helpful way to think of a deliverable. It's actually, technically, those are not deliverables. A deliverable is actually, it's a piece of content, not a piece of communication, right? So a report is a piece of communication. But a deliverable is a piece of content that actually supports decision-making. So like a risk assessment is a deliverable. A market sizing is a deliverable. A financial model is a deliverable. Most of the time, the deliverables are included in the report. But sometimes there are some deliverables that you can't put in the report. So the actual financial model, that's not going to be in the report. Maybe the results of the financial model will be in the report, but not the model itself, for example, right? But that's the difference between deliverable and pieces of communication. So it helps to specify also what are the deliverables. So in the case of help desk, it could be the following. Some kind of quantification of the key measures that are recommended, the investments that are required, an implementation plan, and an outline of the internal comms plan. Okay. So these three things, the solution scope, the scope, basically, the objectives and success criteria, and the deliverables are all aspects or dimensions of the solution, right? And the more we can describe them now, the clearer it is what we want to produce. We still don't know what will be a good solution, but at least we'll have a much clearer idea of solutions that fit and don't fit, solutions that are likely to be accepted versus solutions that are likely not to be accepted, and what are the specific pieces of components that we have to deliver. Any questions about this?
Good, thank you, Nicholas.
Okay, good. One last piece on the project definition template. So this comes from the idea that, again, problem solving in business is not just an intellectual endeavor, but it's also there's a big social dimension to this, or stakeholder dimension. We do this with and for stakeholders. So in order to have kind of the complete picture on the project design, it's actually also really helpful to identify who are the key stakeholders in this project. And this way, when you have defined this, right, when you have this for your project and everything is specific and it's validated by your sponsor, then you now have a very clear idea of what you really need to deliver, and you know that this is what they want, right? This template tells us what we need to deliver. It specifies, it's like in a sense, it's the contract, right, that we make with our sponsor about what we're going to deliver. It says nothing about how we're going to try to do it. That's for later. But this is kind of the contract that we make with our sponsor about what we're going to deliver. It's also the contract that you make with yourself. Okay. So I've included two additional project definition templates so that you have more than simply this one to refer to. And hopefully that will help. And basically that will be, I would argue, is probably, I don't know, I don't want to use the wrong numbers, but like 50 to 75% in terms of volume, not thinking, but in terms of volume of the project proposals that are due in July, the formal project proposals that are due in July. This is probably 50 to 75% of the volume. The thinking, it's actually, there's the other bit requires quite a bit of thinking, phase two related. But already, if you have that, that's already an excellent start. This is the foundation for your projects. I'll repeat a bit what I said last time, right? You really want to make sure that you work on the right problem. And the best way to ensure this is that, like, you work closely with your sponsor and that you basically kind of shake hands on really what you're going to deliver. So in other words, the whole project definition template, and that you shake hands on it, now, rather than, 3 months down the line. Good. So for this phase, right, if you were to use kind of a temperature check, are you on the right path or not? So you're likely to be in the right place if you have a very specific one sentence question about what someone should do, where the someone is specific, right? Is clear. You completed the project definition template thoroughly, and your sponsor has explicitly validated your PDT. So in other words, you've shaken hands on it. Potential warning signs, that's, red flags. So you're buried in research instead of actually trying to define the problem with your sponsor. Research at this stage can be very dangerous. It can really suck you in, and where you feel you get the mistaken impression that you're being productive when in fact you're just inundating yourself with information. So it's very risky at this stage, not recommended to get involved in heavy research at this stage. And other big risk is that the question is too broad or too vague, or could be too easily misunderstood, right? So we saw this today with example 2 and 3. In example 2, it was really not clear what the person meant by effectively integrate. And in question 3, it was just not clear what the we was, or who the we was. And all that is enough to create too much uncertainty about what we're trying to solve, or who needs to do it. So recap of key messages so far. Invest the time necessary to build, right, a robust design for your projects. So define your problem as a single and specific question about what someone should do. Use SCQ to emphasize why this question matters, and build a thorough, robust PDT and get it validated with your sponsor. So as next steps, I would say refine your SCQs or start building your SCQs, and build a draft of your PDT. Again, with your sponsor, maybe give each other feedback. I think that can be really helpful. I'm going to hold kind of online office hours on the 14th of May. It's a little bit similar to Francisca's, what does she call them? Drop-in sessions. So it's kind of first come, first served. And I'll just try my best to help you with whatever questions you have about your project. And then optional assignment number 2 is basically to submit a full PDT. If you do that, which I really recommend, please make it all fit on one slide, because it's just a lot easier to show it and to share it on one slide. So make it fit on one slide. And on the 21st of May, we'll have webinar number 3. So that one will be 2 hours. That one will be and it'll be dense. So I'll provide feedback on some PDT assignments, and then we'll start the work of phase 2, which is basically about defining the road towards the delivery of our project. So building a roadmap for how to tackle our project. Any questions? Okay, then if there are no questions, I think we can end it there. Let me not hold you up any longer. So have a wonderful evening, everybody. And you'll be getting the slides and access to the recording very soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.